Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is our weekend edition. I just couldn't be more excited about, first of all, that we got the original panel back here, Penna Dexter and Kelly Shakelford. Of course, we're going to hear, and we're going to postpone that to the next hour, Kelly Shakelford talking about the oral arguments that were heard by the Supreme Court on Wednesday. Want to make sure that the maximum number of audience has a chance to hear some of that. But in between now, we have a lot of things that have happened this week. A Senate vote on the Born Alive bill. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. Testimony by Michael Cohen. For our Texas listeners, a judge telling counties they cannot remove people from the voter rolls. You can't even make this up. And we might get into some of the economic news, but later on, of course, we have a number of other articles as well. The infanticide vote in Planned Parenthood, North Korea. We have talked about Venezuela. May get back to this. And an issue that I've been following over the last 24 hours is that a number of Democrats voted with Republicans on a procedural vote. It's called a vote to commit. And that caused, first of all, Nancy Pelosi and then AOC, Alexia Ocasio-Cortez, to threaten these Democrats because they want everybody in lockstep. Nancy Pelosi's threatening, of course, you know the kind of threats. You won't get on a committee. You won't get any attention. We'll maybe primary you, something like that. Alexia Ocasio-Cortez threatening to actually send her kind of mob to your offices. So we're going to get into that a little bit later. And then there are some other threats to religious liberty we'll talk about with Kelly Shakelford and Penna. If we get it all in, it will be a miracle.
I'm out of breath already.
So, first of all, I want to thank you, as always, for hosting the show this week. And I know you'll be hosting the show on Monday, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later. But one of the issues you've been following for some time is this Senate vote on the Born Alive bill. Talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I mean, it was really precipitated because of what happened in the state of New York, where their legislature voted in a late-term abortion bill, and then they celebrated, and it got a lot of national news. And then right around the same week, there was a vote on a similar bill in Virginia, which didn't pass, but the governor made statements about taking care of the baby that was born alive and basically leaving it to die. And all these things were sort of shocking to the American system. And Ben Sasse picked up on that. He introduced a bill, the Born Alive Survivors Protection Act. Mm-hmm. And they voted on it in the Senate, and it didn't move forward. It didn't get the required 60 votes to move forward. And so that, again, there's another shock that our U.S. Senate cannot, which is basically controlled by Republicans, cannot see itself clear to protect an alive infant, one that, yes, maybe somebody meant it to be aborted and to die, but it lived, and the medical community should be taking care of it. So that is what happened. And the results of those were, I thought they should have been much more discussed this week. It was barely covered in mainstream media. There was so much happening this week. But to believing Americans and pro-lifers, it's really says something about the direction of our nation and the Democrat Party, because, the majority of Republicans would have done this in the Senate, but it had to get that procedural vote to break the filibuster. And when you have Democrats, you just know that there were only 3 Democrats that supported life. And that's just sad. It's sad commentary.
This is infanticide.
Yes.
I mean, that's what it is. I mean, it's killing a baby after it's born. I think they're driving people into the arms of the pro-life community, and the Democrats are driving people away from their party because this is so extreme that, even Americans who would call themselves pro-choice are not for this.
I would think so. And again, I love what Senator Ben Sass says. He's been on the program with us before. This is not a partisan issue. The vote was 53-44. And first of all, you might say, well, what happened to 3? Well, there are a few Republicans that weren't there, but it wouldn't have mattered anyway. The 44 were all Democrats. The 3 Democrats that did vote for the bill, Doug Jones of Alabama, Joe Manchin in West Virginia, and Bob Casey in Pennsylvania. No surprises on any of those. But this isn't an abortion issue. And one of the things that is so frustrating is whether it was some of the things said in the well of the Senate or even this piece, which I didn't post because it will make you angry. The New York Times really tried to fact check a tweet by Donald Trump and even some of the statements by Ben Sass. And the pushback was horrendous because some of them were saying, do you not understand that what precipitated this were some of the comments by the governor of the state of Virginia? And this almost blinders on, not even aware of the political ramifications of this, is pretty amazing to me, Penna.
It is amazing. And, I really think that these pictures that are painted by the pro-life movement when they take on issues, for instance, the idea that partial birth abortion, it took 10 years to ban it, but that picture,
yes,
that it was a live baby being killed on the way out, and then the picture of late-term abortion, where now the only one that's legal is dismemberment, which seems really worse. And that is what New York solidified, that would be allowed in late term. So that's bad enough. And then that governor, Northam, had to go back and talk about infanticide, that it was acceptable. They just doubled down on their extreme opinions about the quote-unquote right to choose. And so I agree, Kerby, that they are really digging. That's just one issue on which the Democrats, are digging a hole for themselves. I mean, there are many other big government, socialist, Medicare for all, guaranteed income issues that they're really far, far to the left on. But this one is probably the one that, it concerns the pro-life and the Christian community the most because it goes to the sanctity of human life.
Yes, and if I can quote Penna Dexter for just a minute, you did a commentary where you talked about the doubling down. It's one thing to say, well, we'll still support a woman's right to choose, but when you're doubling down, you used the example of Planned Parenthood. The previous president of Planned Parenthood said, we do all sorts of other kinds of things. The current president says, no, this is the mission of Planned Parenthood, abortion. And then when you have not even willing to say, okay, maybe these third trimester abortions, maybe there's a reason we should be concerned about that, or infanticide, and recognizing that they're actually doubling down in ways that I never would have predicted.
I wouldn't either. What happened to safe, legal, and rare?
Yes.
That's gone.
Yeah. It's, again, as you say, they're doing this in a number of different areas where they're going so extreme that they really are painting themselves as a very, very small party, if they continue this. Now, obviously, Nancy Pelosi doesn't go along with a lot of these things that are so extreme because she has a little more.
We'll get to that in a minute. Yeah.
She has some political, she understands that is way over the top, like, the Green New Deal and all this kind of stuff. But this, I think, is one of those things where their base won't let them be anything but extreme. This is going to really hurt them, I think. I think the country does. I mean, the idea that a baby is born and you can't pass a law to protect a baby after it's born, you've lost the American people at that point.
I would think so. I mentioned Penna's commentary. Hers today on government daycare. We'll get to that later. But if you go into See More Viewpoints, you can find some that she's written on doubling down. And back to this whole idea of Nancy Pelosi. Another one is Dianne Feinstein. Cal Thomas wrote a column the other day. He says, I agree with some of the statements by Dianne Feinstein, then writes, I didn't think I'd ever say that. It turns out that there were all sorts of kids in her office saying, and I mean everything from kids to teenagers, saying, we need the Green New Deal. And she says, it's not going to pass. And I know a lot more about this than you do. And he said, I can't believe it. I actually agree with Dianne Feinstein, an adult in the room. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Psychiatrist Lyle Rossiter wrote an article many years ago with the simple title, Follow the Rules. He has noticed among his clients and among Americans in general an unwillingness to follow basic rules in various arenas. As he points out, there are consequences for breaking the rules in 5 areas. In the care of our bodies, we have to obey the rules of physics, chemistry, and biology. When we break these rules, we get fat, we get sick, we even die. Moreover, the epidemics of substance abuse and STDs also illustrate the principle of sowing and reaping. In marital and family relations, we have to follow certain rules of fidelity, thoughtfulness, and responsibility. When we don't, divorce and broken families result. Children are raised without both parents and grow up with emotional scars or deficits. In economic transactions, we have to obey the laws of supply, demand, price, and scarcity. Failure to do so results in consumer debt and bankruptcy. In social behavior, we have to follow the rules of honesty, fairness, mutuality, and courtesy. If we disobey those rules, we have social turmoil. In political transactions, we have to follow the rules set out in our Constitution that protect individuals from harmful actions by governments. Breaking those rules leads to political corruption and chaos. If these are the rules, why do we fail to follow them? Rossiter believes it is because we are driven by sexual and aggressive impulses, by attachment and dependent impulses, by acquisitive and narcissistic impulses. These are the rules for success. Follow them and you're likely to succeed. Break them and you will probably fail. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From roadside attractions, Run the Race. 2 brothers share an unbreakable bond, but life's unexpected adversities put their future in question. Run the Race, rated PG, now playing.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, and again, if you are waiting to hear from Kelly Shakelford about the oral arguments before the Supreme Court, we are going to do that in about 45 minutes. Just wanted to make sure that we had the maximum number of audience members hearing some of the comments, and it is just thrilling to have an individual like this who's actually been there, hearing the oral arguments, giving us some of the background on all of that and some of the press that was taking place. But I thought for just a few minutes I'd go around the round table. We don't talk about the Mueller investigation very often. We don't talk about Michael Cohen very often. But we did have something rather unique. Matter of fact, one member of Congress said this may be the first time that somebody who has actually been convicted of lying to Congress, who then was brought back to speak to Congress. And our friend David French said, you know, there were a couple of things. First of all, Michael Cohen testified that Roger Stone told Donald Trump about the WikiLeaks dump. That seems to be true, but it's like, okay, what's there? There's not a lot of there. Michael Cohen testified that he suspected that Donald Trump knew in advance about Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting with a Russian lawyer. Maybe, maybe not, but it's all speculation. The two are a little more significant, and as Michael Cohen asserted that Trump directed Cohen to make hush money payments to the porn star. And then the fourth one is that Donald Trump gave implied directions to lie to Congress, but even Michael Cohen said, no, but you just sort of figured out what he wanted me to do. So if you're looking for lying to Congress, or since we have a lawyer here, suborning perjury, couldn't exactly see that. So after all of the testimony, both behind closed doors and in front of closed doors, Penna, any comments about Michael Cohen's testimony?
Well, first of all, I learned a couple things. I didn't learn very much in it, but I learned a couple of things. One, that Trump running for president was Cohen's idea.
Yes.
He basically said that, and that he never intended to win. that Trump never intended to win.
We've heard that many times.
Yeah, we've heard that many times, but
whether it's true or not.
Whether it's true or not, those are a couple of things. But yes, absolutely, never in the history of, I think this was David French or one of the commentators that said of Congress, as a witness who was convicted of lying to Congress, been immediately invited to testify again to Congress. And so, and fortunately, it was prominently featured again and again as different Republicans asked him questions. I mean, the Republicans were pretty combative, especially some of the Freedom Caucus people.
Yeah, Jordan. Yeah.
Jim Jordan, for instance. And it was just interesting.
Mark Meadows.
They were
very good.
It was good for them to do that. I mean, what else are you really going to do? Take him seriously?
Yeah. And Jim Jordan saying, well, I really think Lanny Davis wrote most of this, about him being racist. Isn't it amazing that, there were people that worked for Donald Trump for years, African-American, never said that, never called him racist. And then all of a sudden he runs for the presidency, and now he's the premier example of a racist. I don't know. What do you think?
I thought this was bad on a lot of levels. Number one, what's the purpose? This is not a congressional purpose.
Sure.
I mean, is this the new thing? So now when Obama's president, what we do is try to find somebody that wants to say something bad about Obama, and then we call them for a hearing? I mean, it's not what Congress is supposed to be about. If they're investigating something in particular and you have a witness, okay. But this was like just a sleaze campaign. Let's see if we can call a really sleazy guy and see if we can get him to say a bunch of sleazy things about the president. So, number one, I thought it was totally inappropriate. I thought it was totally inappropriate also because the president, at the exact time they're doing this, is actually overseas doing something very
Hanoi.
important
in
foreign policy. We don't do that. We don't. I mean, it's considered very bad form, and we don't do that to our president. Whatever the president, if you're the different party, you don't do an attack hearing while he's gone overseas representing the United States of America. So I thought that was really bad. And then the other problem is, I mean, this guy has no credibility. So he was caught in a number of lies, even in his testimony. I mean, he said he didn't want a job with the White House, and there's been I don't know how many people come out now and said he came to me begging for me to get a job at the White House. He said that Jay Sekulow told him to change his testimony.
I want to get to that one.
And and Jay within milliseconds, was out with a statement saying that is completely and totally false. So the guy is just, you can't believe anything he says. So the best example of this is if they were going to try to do anything criminally, I don't mean the Congress. Let's say the Southern District of New York, the U.S. Attorney's office there. If they were going to come after Trump, Michael Cohen would not be a witness.
Yeah.
Okay. He would hurt your case.
Yes.
So the idea that he's supposed to testify and we're supposed to believe anything he says, it was just kind of salacious TV is all it was.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I think, because they are expecting the Mueller report to come out and not to be a blockbuster with
right. I was going to get to that
concrete
next,
evidence against
Mm-hmm.
Trump. So they're looking for other lines of attack, and they just thought this would be a great thing to do since Cohen has so many incentives to now speak out against Trump. One, to keep himself from any more than 3 years jail time, and other reasons. And the question I have to ask in my mind is, if you thought he was racist, if he was a con man and all these things, why did you stay with him for 10 years?
Yeah.
So, to me, that in itself just negates any influence he has on the American public, if people would, are considering that. But this is very, very political. It's just totally political. And, they're using it as a tool. But it didn't, I don't think, advance the case for impeachment of the president. And that was
I think it did the opposite
goal. Yes,
Yeah.
I agree.
Because here's a guy who really obviously wants to do whatever he can to hurt President Trump. And yet he said, basically, there's no collusion.
Yeah, no collusion.
I don't know about any.
He didn't tell me to lie.
This is his attorney,
Yeah.
okay? And you should have known this because this is his attorney who has all of his private information, and they raided his office and looked through all of his information, and yet they've got nobody anywhere has been charged with anything with regard to Russia collusion, conspiracy. So it's not surprising, but it in that way, it kind of really hurt everything that the Democrats have been saying for the last 2 years to try to go after Trump.
Let me real quickly come back to the Jay Sekulow issue, because I brought that up yesterday just in passing, but I wanted to say that we have now people sitting across the table that know him even better than I do, and I feel like I've known him over the years as well. And again, the BuzzFeed says, for example, that indeed the president's lawyer, Jay Sekulow, changed the testimony. And I love at least what David French says. I'm going to take a point of personal privilege here and state that in all the years I've known Jay Sekulow, I have never, ever seen him even come close to violating the canons of legal ethics, much less knowingly attempt to provide false testimony to Congress, a court, or any other relevant tribunal. Jay Sekulow isn't just a good lawyer. He's a shrewd man who knows that no single client is worth a reputation he spent a lifetime building. Oh, that was a pretty good line. And
yes.
Kelly, you've worked with Jay Sekulow so often. Of course, you both have been involved very much in various things you've done there in front of the Supreme Court.
In fact, I was just telling his son earlier today on radio that Jay and I worked on a case together for the first time at the Supreme Court, 20 years or so ago.
Yes.
And as a thank you, Jay gave me some cufflinks. And I told his son, I said, tell Jay, because Jay couldn't be on the show. It was just me and his son on the show. And I said, tell Jay when you talk to him that I wore his cufflinks Wednesday at the Supreme Court.
I saw that on Instagram from your wife.
Yeah,
yes, I saw those. Yeah.
So yeah, Jay, I've known Jay a long time. Jay, anybody that knows, that's just a complete lie. When Cohen said that, Jay doesn't do that. He wouldn't do that. And for both the reasons that David French said. Number one, Jay's an ethical person, and he's not going to do that. But number two, Jay is also very, very smart.
Mm-hmm.
He would never risk his reputation for some person like that. He wouldn't do that. He's just not. Yeah. He's not, dumb enough to do that. In addition to, so assume he's unethical, which he's not. He's too smart for that. So It's just a lie by a guy who's lied before and doesn't seem to have any problem with it.
I know. When that surfaced, I just thought we'd need to give a little more context to that, if nothing else, for anybody that, again, wonders whether some of the things that have been coming out by BuzzFeed, which, by the way, many times have been wrong, or some of the things by Michael Cohen are wrong. So we're going to take a break. Come back. Let's talk a little bit about Texas news for just a minute. Kelly pointed this out the other day, and I thought it's worth talking about for just a minute. Judge tells counties not to remove people from the voter rolls, and this will get you upset, especially in light of some of the documentation we've provided when we've talked with Jonathan Saenz and in the past with State Senator, now former State Senator Huffines, and some others about voter fraud, I guess, or lack of voter integrity. We'll call it that. We'll come back and talk about this more right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Next hour, we will spend some time talking about that case before the Supreme Court. But for especially our Texas listeners, we have been talking about the concern that you have too many people on the voter rolls. And whether you're listening from the state of Texas or those of you listening in Minnesota or some of you listening online, we have a couple of hundred counties now in America where we actually have more people registered than you have people of voting age on the registries. So obviously there's a need to clear that up. So in some almost inscrutable wisdom, this one judge in San Antonio ordered Texas to tell counties not to remove people from the voter rolls as part of the state's effort to review the citizenship of some of those voters. And a lot of that has to do with what the Secretary of State in Texas did, and actually set out some of these notices of examination letters. Kelly, this is something I know you've been following since the days we talked with you about True the Vote, but there is a need to clean up the voter rolls, and now we have a judge saying you can't do that.
Yeah, I mean, look, you had the Secretary of State come up with a list of, I forget what the number is now. It was it 85,000 or 90,000? Anyway, it was a lot.
Yeah.
It was a large number of people that supposedly, had voted. I mean, these are people that were not citizens and had voted.
Mm-hmm.
And so now, supposedly a mistake was made to one of the lists where maybe 25,000 of the names were actually citizens and all that. So that's what they kind of used to go after this and to say, oh, this is voter suppression. And so the part of the order that bothers me is not, you could say don't take anybody off the voter roll until, you have real proof and until, since you've made some mistakes here. But what bothered me is he said, you can't contact these people to find out if they're, illegally on the voter roll. But, and then I looked at the judge's name and I went, oh, okay. And I'm going to go harken back. Kirby's going to remember this. I hadn't told you this yet. But do you remember a case many years ago where a judge issued an order and said if anybody prayed at the graduation,
I remember that.
He was going to throw them in jail and that they would wish that they had died as a child when this court gets through with it. That is this judge.
Oh no.
Okay. So this is a federal judge who obviously in my opinion, we could approve upon. And
he's still there.
And he's still there because they're there for life. And he's issued this ridiculous decision.
Wow.
And so.
Oh, now I'm doing a commentary on it for sure.
So, for those who don't remember, we had a case years ago.
I do. Tell a story.
And what happened is
it's one of those head shakers.
A lawsuit was brought by an atheist family saying, we want to make sure that nobody mentions anything about God in the graduation ceremony. And the judge, issues an order that says if anybody says anything about God in the graduation ceremony, they'll violate my order, and that if they violate my order, I will arrest them and have them put in jail. And then he goes on to say, anybody who violates my order will wish that they died as a child right before this court gets through with it. So here's what he said. Well, we represent the valedictorian.
Yeah. She's
going to mention God. Okay? And so, and she's earned the right to be the valedictorian. And so we actually had to file what's called a writ of prohibition, very rare, an emergency appeal to the Federal Court of Appeals and ask them to impanel 3 judges in 24 hours and essentially slap this guy.
I mean, you had to do this right before the ceremony.
Yeah, because the graduation was coming up.
I remember it.
And it takes months for this kind of thing to happen, but it just tells you something that in 24 hours, 3 judges from the Fifth Circuit Federal Court of Appeals did impanel, and they did say, "Oh, this is unconstitutional what this judge did," and so that is so rare because they're so protective of their colleagues. And then he even was trying to, defend himself in the press, about what he did was fine. So this is that judge. So but this is why we have a problem with all this is I think everybody wants to have the voter rolls cleaned up. If people are on there that shouldn't be on there, if they're not citizens, they should not be on the voter roll. Not even just for if they vote, but other people can fraudulently use their name and vote. And so we need to check that out. We need to verify. And this concept that if the state were to ask someone, do we have your information correct? It says that you're registered, but our information says you're not a citizen. I mean, the idea that that's too scary for somebody to be asked that question, I'm like, give me a break. What we're talking about here is watering down the votes of legal voters. I mean, this is something that you have to check on. So I don't like federal judges thinking that they're kings and stepping in this situation and trying to overtake things and say, I am now the Secretary of State. If they want to say this particular action of doing such and such is against the law, fine. But this idea that everything now has to be, and this is what he said in the order, you have to run everything by him.
Yeah, right. It's got to go through the court.
He's got a problem.
He's now
Court's approval and proof.
He's now the new CEO. He's now in the executive branch.
He's the Secretary of State instead of David Whitley. By the way, the numbers were 95,000 individuals that they identified, and at least 58,000 of those voted at least in one or more elections. Now, since that time, they've said maybe some of those could have just not shown up right. In other words, you might have Robert Gomez, and it's Bob Gomez, or, whatever, Julio, and it's a different name because he goes by a different nickname. So they found that there are a few of them, but still... the evidence is that we have thousands and thousands of people that have voted illegally. And this judge says you can't begin to touch the voter rolls and clean them up.
And, when you really think about it, every time somebody votes opposite to you illegally, they've canceled out your vote. And that should not, we should be trying our best across this nation to mitigate that type of thing happening. The other thing that always puzzles me about this is, why can't we clean up our voter rolls the way the technology we have today?
Of course, yes.
There's a will on the part of the left not to have the voter rolls cleaned up, and so we're dealing with that more than anything. We have the ability to clean them up, and of course, sometimes you do have to just make a phone call and do some investigation. But to be prevented by a judge from doing that, it's undemocratic. Really, it's anti-democracy. And so, I hope that, I guess this is going to go up the court system.
Probably will.
It will.
One of the things is the Brennan Center has said, well, voter fraud does not exist. And if there's anything, let's give a shout out to our current Attorney General, Ken Paxton, who all of us around the table know. He says, I'm going to really prosecute these. And if you've been keeping track, from time to time, every time I find out another prosecution, or in some cases jail sentence, that's good, because there isn't as much incentive to go after voter fraud if there is no evidence of misdoing, or in the particular county, it only is a misdemeanor. And just think of all the things, if you're a county judge in Collin County, Dallas County, wherever you might be, and you got all these very important issues, pretty low on the list is prosecuting voter fraud. But when you have the Attorney General of the state of Texas saying, no, we're going to go after these individuals, I think that will pretty quickly set aside the idea that voter fraud is only in the minds of a few people in the so-called Christian right who are worried about voter suppression, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's important. What Attorney General Paxton has done is important because he's shown that there are numerous people voting illegally, and the reason is there's no consequences. Yeah. And there are people, I think one of the others, I forget where this is, maybe Fort Worth or somewhere, but they were doing the absentee, that was being done fraudulently. And again, if you don't stop that, it only increases. And so I think it's really important. This is, every illegal vote waters down a real, person's vote that is voting. I mean, this is how we run our whole system. So if you don't protect this, everything's going to really fall apart. And so this is the ultimate about the rule of law, about having the peaceful transition of power. I mean, everybody wants the elections to be free and fair and correct, and
almost everybody.
Well, yeah, everybody who should be in this country, and so I just think this is the kind of judicial activism and abusiveness that Trump is replacing on the court with the judges we've been getting on the court. Judges who know their role as a judge, who don't think they're a politician or a king, but think that their job is to be subservient to the law and to lay out what the law is.
As we've talked about, help is on the way. Again, we have a link to some of those nominations on our website. It's linked to First Liberty. We'll be right back.
Conservative heads are spinning with successive announcements of presidential candidacies, complete with promises to enact expensive government programs. Let's pick one: government daycare. It's really preschool because the proposal references curriculum standards. Senator and presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren proposes federal subsidies for universal early education and childcare. In the wealthiest country on the planet, she argues, access to affordable and high-quality childcare and early education should be a right, not a privilege reserved for the rich. The plan, which will cost $700 billion over 10 years, will fund a network of locally run childcare facilities. The program will be free for poor and middle-class families. Others will pay fees on a sliding scale based on income, with no family paying over 7% of its income for childcare. The current average is 9 to 36%. This will be funded via a tax on wealth the senator has proposed previously. Daycare is parents' least favorite childcare option. A 2012 Pew Research study found that 2/3 of mothers prefer not to work full-time, but to work part-time or stay at home with their children. If they need daycare, they'd like it to be family or church-based. Even Senator Warren didn't put her own kids in daycare. She flew in a relative. The Warren plan states that child care providers receiving federal funds must, quote, meet standards that now apply to Head Start. The Heritage Foundation's Lindsay Burke points out that Head Start is far from a success story when it comes to participant outcomes. Lindsay Burke says Head Start needs reforming to offer more choice to low-income parents. Of the Warren plan, she writes, creating another benefit for universal child care merely establishes a new federal subsidy for middle-class and upper-income families. One more point. We should not be creating new ways to place little children in the government indoctrination pipeline. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and then, of course, we're going to have a chance to hear Kelly tell us all sorts of stories about the oral arguments before the Supreme Court on the case, the Bladensburg Cross case or the Peace Cross case, or it comes by different names. But this was kind of interesting the other day. Dr. Merrill Matthews was on and was talking about the fact that with the economy humming, you know, he says that your father's Democratic Party might have had a chance of capturing the White House, but your children's Democratic Party is facing a tougher fight, and talking about how it is difficult to unseat a president when the economy is doing well. Well, the difficulty for some of the people that are rooting for these Democratic candidates is to try to tear down the economy. So here's one that says Trump and the Republicans promised economic growth much better than Obama's, but that's not what happened. And I remember reading that and going, it says, well, they didn't reach 3%. You mean the 3% that they just reached the other day? And I think it illustrates again that the economy is doing very well. I took the time to post one piece from the Wall Street Journal about tax reform. And lo and behold, when you reduce taxes and reduce regulations, you actually increase all sorts of things, not the least of which tax revenues and the economic dynamism of the society and the economy.
You know, it's fairly simple, but the left tries to really confuse the issue. That was such a good piece by Dr. Matthews the other day. And then this one, Thank You, Tax Reform, by Kevin Hassett, who serves, does he serve in the White House now? I think he does.
I don't know. We've interviewed him many times,
Yeah.
but I've kind of lost track of where he is at the moment,
But
to be honest with you.
it's posted at pointofview.net. It's really good to read. And I think one good thing about it is it talks about business investment. There were so many things in the tax bill that encouraged money to come back, businesses bring money back from overseas, businesses to invest. And so the number now, the best news here, business investment contributed 0.69 percentage points to GDP growth. That's almost a full point because you add housing subtracted 0.14% because housing was a little soft. So it's almost a full percentage point of GDP growth just from business investment.
Right.
And, you know, encouraging that is huge. I mean, that is very big because it lasts. It also contributes to all kinds of other growth factors across the economy. People's well-being is better because you've got more jobs, higher wages, and all of that, better benefits, bonuses. And so, you know, there's not a substitute for free market, incentive-based governing. And what we're getting from the left, all the proposals are the exact opposite of that.
Yeah, the economy is it's incredible to see what's happened. But what's interesting is when you reduce regulations, when you reduce taxes, the government actually ends up with more money.
Yes.
Right?
Reduce taxes and increase tax revenues.
Yeah, because the economy starts humming.
Churning.
And it does better, and everybody's doing better. The household income is up, average household income way up, where it was just stagnating and dying under Obama. And all these things have been made positive. But the interesting thing is, what do the governments do with all this extra money? Okay? There was an article, I think this week, if I'm not mistaken, in the Wall Street Journal, congratulating the states that are using this extra money to give back to the people. Mm-hmm. Let's take Texas as an example. It was not on that list. Why? Because what Texas is doing right now in the legislature is they're looking for ways to spend the extra money. Now, it's things that you might say, well, that's really good. They're giving every teacher $5,000, okay? They're going to, and so, but what happens is when you spend the money, then people get used to the extra money you spent, and it's hard to ever, pull back. It's like the government doesn't ever reduce their budget.
Right.
So it is fascinating to watch how people handle this, how different governments, how the states handle this.
Very true.
And I think what you're going to find is they're getting this extra money because the government is decreasing and letting the private economy go. But then when the government thinks, I got all these extra goodies to distribute, instead of giving that back to the people, then they're doing the very opposite by how they're handling the extra money that's coming in.
So again, that article, Thank You, Tax Reform, is there. I'll just call it Tax Reform Works either way. And if I can do a little plug, we talk about Christians and economics. That's my book. But the publisher decided to put it into Spanish. And the reason for that, interestingly enough, is that they're finding in these Latin American countries, because the publisher right now is actually in Argentina, or at least the Argentinian was the one that did the translation. We take for granted that we understand that, whether it's Milton Friedman or Gilder, or even in the Christian world, you go all the way back to Larry Burkett and Crown Financial and all these individuals, but they don't have those kind of ideas there, especially in Venezuela right now. So that's one of the reasons why they took my book and translated it into Spanish. So I thought that was kind of interesting, because we probably need to translate it into simple English and give it to certain members of Congress.
Well, I love
right?
there's all these principles, and people don't ever teach on this anymore. But there's all these principles that are Christian principles that weave in and out of the free market. I mean, for instance, those who serve the best are those who succeed.
Yes.
There's an understanding in the free market economy of the sin nature of man.
Right.
If you are liberal and you think, oh, no, people aren't sinful. People aren't sinful when they're born. First, I don't know about your kids, but I'm just having a hard time believing that you really believe that people aren't sinful when they're born. But if you take that, well, people aren't sinful, then you don't believe in the free market system. If you understand they are sinful, then what the free market economy does is again, if we all get the same money no matter what we do, guess what we do?
Yeah.
We sit on our rump and we just collect the money. And that's because of our sin nature, right? But if we have that competition, if we have that free market system, we do better. It's good. It's better even for us, in living our lives. But we end up producing so much better. The quality of the product is better. The service is better. We treat each other better. There's all these wonderful principles. And so I'm really glad that the book that you've done, Kerby, is getting into other cultures that don't understand those things.
And again, Bono, I quoted, I don't quote Bono very often, but again, he pointed out when he was at a very significant World Economic Forum, he's not exactly the greatest proponent of the free market, but he said, I got to admit, capitalism is taking more people out of poverty than any other ism. So when you got Bono talking about that in a World Economic Forum and recognizing that the number of people that were in extreme poverty, there's more than 1 billion people now that have moved out of the category of extreme poverty, and that's due to a free market. So that's something we need to spread far and wide as well.
Did you give one of your books to AOC?
She does speak Spanish, so maybe she'd like that one. I don't know. But anyway, just an illustration again of sometimes we struggle with the fact that on one hand you see somebody saying, well, actually the Trump economy is no better than the Obama economy. How you could say that with a straight face, I don't know. But the good news was we give you a couple other facts and figures that really try to cover some of those issues. And Penna, when we come back, I'm kind of eager to find out a little bit more.
But just let me add that
Go ahead.
it's that you wrote this book, and that I think this is something we have to stress on Point of View. People say, well, why does the economy have anything to do with the Christian worldview? It has a lot to do with the Christian worldview, and people are not educated on this. I mean, it's kind of scary that we have to now re-educate a whole generation on the principles of capitalism and the way the economy works. But you do, because otherwise everything moves left.
Yeah, and all the kids that we've talked with lately that have graduated from college, 2 out of every 3 think socialism is better than capitalism, or that there's no difference. For us. Yeah, and got some work to do. That's why we're doing what we're doing. When we come back, we're going to talk about the argument before the Supreme Court. Looking forward to it. We'll be back right after this.
The leader looked around the table, motioning to the older men. He said, "You're here to remind us how faithful God has been in the past. Now, you middle-aged guys, you keep us focused on what God is doing right now. Make sure we don't stop. And you younger guys, keep us looking forward. Imagine what God wants us to be doing in the years to come." There's a lot of wisdom there. We have to be thankful for the past, focused on the present, and mindful to plan for a great future. Many listeners have made bold moves to partner with Point of View Radio and accomplish great things for more than 45 years. But as we look around, we do see many positive things, and I think we can all admit there's a lot more to be done. It's time to think about your next bold move, what you can do to invest for our nation's future. Be thinking about that. If you have an answer now, don't wait. Make your next bold move now. Give online at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. It's our future. The time is now. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, and we have in studio with us today Kelly Shakelford, Penna Dexter, and we are looking forward to hearing from Kelly Shakelford because, of course, as we have been mentioning all week and even trying to give you some perspective, the oral arguments took place on Wednesday, and we have posted a number of articles. The other day we posted one on the Supreme Court crossroads, and, of course, the Breakpoint mentions it today. We have a link to First Liberty, so you can watch some of the video, you can watch some of the press conference, and all of the rest. So we're going to spend some time hearing from Kelly, getting kind of the inside story. So sit back and pay attention and listen. A little bit later, we'll get into a couple of other issues this week. Of course, we've dealt with everything from the Born Alive bill on infanticide, North Korean talks, and the decision by the president to walk away. We're going to get into some interesting kind of behind-the-scenes battles right now in the Democratic Party, where a number of moderate Democrats voted with Republicans, and Nancy Pelosi and AOC and some of them are not too happy about that. And so we'll get into those topics. So we have a lot to cover. And Penna Dexter, I've been looking forward to hearing from Kelly Shakelford.
I'm glad we have the man here in the studio to, first of all, I'm interested in how the arguments went, of course, and we've read some in the news about it. So, Kelly?
Yes, for those who don't know, I mean, I think most people know, but this is a veterans memorial that was put up almost 100 years ago by mothers who lost their sons in World War I and the American Legion. It was to remember 49 young men who died in that county right outside of D.C., and it was on American Legion land. And but eventually what happened is the government had roads by there, and so they took over the land to control the roads, but they didn't want to disturb the memorial, and so they left it there. And it has the names of the 49 men on it. It has an American Legion symbol and words like honor and endurance and courage and valor. And anyway, all of a sudden, after all these years, because now it's on government land, the American humanists said, look, there's a cross. It's on government land. And they filed a lawsuit. We won at the district court. At the Court of Appeals, we lost. I mean, one of the judges suggested that the solution might be to cut the arms off the cross because they said that way it can remain there and yet it won't offend anybody anymore if we cut the arms of the cross off, which
would offend me.
Yeah, it would offend me too. And so then we appealed to the Supreme Court, and our argument was this week in the Supreme Court. And there were two things. Sort of, I mean, the way I could describe this is there were two different battles going on in the Supreme Court. Battle number one was who wins the case? Do we tear down this Veterans Memorial after 100 years? And by the way, if we do, what does that now mean? What it means is religious cleansing across the country would break out. Arlington Cemetery, Arlington National Cemetery, there are large freestanding crosses that will have to be torn down. This would just be the beginning of really a cleansing that would go on all across the country. You'd have a bulldozer and a sandblaster in pretty much every community of every state of the country. The other option, though, is if we win, the second battle is, well, how do you win? And this is very unusual because normally it's one lawyer on one side and one lawyer on the other. And so in this case, the lawyer for the American Humanist Association is on one side, and it would be one. But it was actually different because this time there was the American Human Association lawyer, and then there were 3 lawyers on our side. One was us, who represent the American Legion, and Mike Carvin was our lead counsel. This was his 11th argument at the Supreme Court. Another was Neil Katyal. Neil is liberal. People might see him on MSNBC. He was President Obama's Solicitor General. So he's a very capable lawyer, but very liberal. And then third was the Solicitor General's Office of the United States, Jeff Wall, and he's the Deputy Solicitor General. And so what you had, the first one is, do the humanists win or do we win and the veterans win and the memorial stays up and we don't start tearing down memorials? The second argument is between the 3 on our side, right? Mm-hmm. And what you have is this Obama liberal lawyer who argued, and he was, by the way, representing the state of Maryland that owned the land, and then we were representing the American Legion who owns the memorial, and then the Solicitor General was arguing on behalf of the interests of the United States. But Neil Katyal, the more liberal lawyer, he doesn't want, he is the more traditional, he would like to take down probably lots of religious symbols and crosses. But in this case, he's representing a client. So his argument was, hey, there's unusual circumstances here. This cross is up because it's a veterans memorial. There's a lot of history about veterans memorials in World War I, and that the cross was used. It's not being really used in a religious way. It's being used to remember the fallen. There's all these secular symbols on it, like the American Legion, blah, blah, blah. Easy case to decide. No reason to change any of the law for any future cases. So we argued, what are you talking about? Yes, there is a need to change. It's ridiculous that we're in the Supreme Court with a 4-volume appendix that cost us $55,000. It was so thick to print, and 5 years of litigation over whether we're going to tear down a 100-year-old Veterans Memorial. Why are we in that predicament? We're in that predicament because past Supreme Courts, have created a horrible analysis of the Establishment Clause. It's called the Lemon Test. Mm-hmm. It's aptly named.
1971.
And then they've added to that another deal called the Endorsement Test.
Right, 84.
And by the way, if people don't know what that is, the Endorsement Test means if you walk through a community, if you're just like a passerby through a community, and if a random passerby in your community would look up and see a symbol and see a religious symbol on it and think, oh, I feel like an outsider to the community because of that symbol, then that's a violation of the Establishment Clause. And so it's what's called the offended observer.
The reasonable observer.
Yes.
Yeah, and all that. Yeah.
And
just nuts.
Yeah, and so
nuts.
It created chaos. I mean, so everything can be unconstitutional and nobody knows what the law is because it's certainly not what the Constitution says. It's now these bizarre tests. So what we argued on behalf of the American Legion and what the Solicitor General's office, the Trump Solicitor General's office, agreed with us, we've got to get rid of Lemon. We've got to get rid of this horrible analysis that's been used in the past that's creating chaos and is not working. And we got to go back to the Constitution and what the Establishment Clause really means, which is we don't want there to be a national church and we don't want people coerced to support the national church or to be forced in any way to violate their religion. So it's a coercion test. If the government's not like either establishing a national church or coercing you, then it's not a violation. There's nothing wrong with a cross or 10 Commandments or anything else. Founders had no problem with that. They had no problem with "In God We Trust" on the coins. They had no problem with any of this. Let's get back to what the Constitution really means. So that's the setup I'll give you for the battle that was going on our side, which is we should win, and here's how we should win.
We'll take a break and come back and talk a little bit more. I don't do the kind of interviews you do, but the other day somebody said, well, if you get rid of the Lemon Test, what do you end up with? I said, I don't know. The Constitution sounds good enough to me. The way we dealt with it before 1971, right?
That's right.
But anyway, we'll have a little bit more comments from Kelly Shakelford. And, of course, Penna Dexter wants to weigh in with some of her comments as well. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Psychiatrist Lyle Rossiter wrote an article many years ago with the simple title, Follow the Rules. He has noticed among his clients and among Americans in general an unwillingness to follow basic rules in various arenas. As he points out, there are consequences for breaking the rules in 5 areas. In the care of our bodies, we have to obey the rules of physics, chemistry, and biology. When we break these rules, we get fat, we get sick, we even die. Moreover, the epidemics of substance abuse and STDs also illustrate the principle of sowing and reaping. In marital and family relations, we have to follow certain rules of fidelity, thoughtfulness, and responsibility. When we don't, divorce and broken families result. Children are raised without both parents and grow up with emotional scars or deficits. In economic transactions, we have to obey the laws of supply, demand, price, and scarcity. Failure to do so results in consumer debt and bankruptcy. In social behavior, we have to follow the rules of honesty, fairness, mutuality, and courtesy. If we disobey those rules, we have social turmoil. In political transactions, we have to follow the rules set out in our Constitution that protect individuals from harmful actions by governments. Breaking those rules leads to political corruption and chaos. If these are the rules, why do we fail to follow them? Rossiter believes it is because we are driven by sexual and aggressive impulses, by attachment and dependent impulses, by acquisitive and narcissistic impulses. These are the rules for success. Follow them and you're likely to succeed. Break them and you will probably fail. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From roadside attractions, Run the Race. 2 brothers share an unbreakable bond, but life's unexpected adversities put their future in question. Run the Race, rated PG, now playing.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, it is our weekend edition. Penna Dexter, Kelly, Shakelford. I might just mention our first article here will take you to firstliberty.org. Of course, you can go there directly, but this is a media one where you can have a chance to see the press conference, which I had a chance to watch first on Facebook and then watch it again and then watch it again and some of the pictures and all that. But Penna, we are just sort of getting the insider look right now at what was happening in the oral arguments that took place on Wednesday.
Yes, and Kelly, of course, was there along with the other attorneys from First Liberty Institute. But what I was interested in is something Kelly mentioned, and that is that our side had 3 attorneys arguing for the side to preserve the cross. And then there was one on the other side. So the 3 were arguing, and it looks pretty good for the protection of the cross, but there's way more at stake, and that's kind of where these other 3 attorneys interact. So please explain that. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and what happened is, Neil Katyal gets up first and says, we should win because the facts are so good here, but this is the only cross that gets protected, basically, right? And all the other cases, there's no help in the future. We then get up and said, no, Lemon it should be dead. It's not useful. It's harmful. This court ignores it, as it did in the last opinion, the town of Greece. You can't have a test that you apply when you want to. Then it's not a real valid way to apply the Establishment Clause. We said the coercion test, and then Jeff Wall, who is the Deputy Solicitor General, agreed with us and went through that argument. And, of course, then the American Humanist lawyer, she got up and said, you got this one's unconstitutional. And there are a lot of theatrics, as you might guess, in the oral argument. what? Oh, and by the way, and then at the end, Neil Katyal gets to go last because if you go first, you get to go last. So he gets to save a few minutes of his time. He gets up, and again, his client is Maryland. He's trying to. They don't want the memorial torn down, and so instead of getting up and arguing for his memorial not to be torn down, he gets up and attacks our side. Okay, so if you didn't know he was with the Obama administration and on the left, by then you realize it.
What's going on?
What was so weird about that was he's not even representing his client.
Yeah.
If you're representing your client and you want the memorial upheld, you might, let's say you think, oh, we can just keep Lemon and we win under Lemon. But if you don't, you'd like these other possibilities for you to win. And so it was so obvious to people who kind of know what's going on here that Justice Kavanaugh kind of exposed him in front of the whole courtroom. He looked at him, he said, well, you're saying this coercion test and this other approach is bad and we don't need to do that. And he said, but what if we decide that it's unconstitutional under Lemon? What do we do then for your client? Well, and any lawyer would say, well, let's go to the next test because I'll win under that test. That's not what he did. He sat there going, humana, and he didn't really know what to say. And people are starting to chuckle. And then he finally says, well, I guess maybe we would reconsider Lemon, and the whole place burst out into laughter.
Yes.
Because Kavanaugh just exposed him, kind of saying, why don't you represent your client?
Yeah.
Why
don't you stop?
So that was fascinating. But so there was this battle within the battle going on.
Interesting.
And what I would say is a summary. And again, people, they can go to firstliberty.org. They can look at all kinds of stuff. In fact, we're going to post later today, and three of us who were in the courtroom are going to do an analysis of what we thought about what happened and kind of relay some of this. If people want to listen to the argument, you can listen to it.
Yes.
It's available online.
That's true.
If people want to read the transcript, you can read the transcript. Although there is a little difference being in the courtroom and seeing, kind of how things are going there. It's a little different sometimes than the emotionless transcript or whatever. But what I would say is I think it's highly likely that Lemon is dead, which would be a huge. I can't describe what a good thing that would be for our country. The justices, especially the 5 conservative justices, if you were worried about them, you'd look at them and you'd say, well, I know what Alito would do on that, and I feel like I know exactly what Thomas would do on that, but Kavanaugh's new, Gorsuch is new, and the chief is kind of the swing, and so that's who you're looking for, right? Well, all 3, the chief, Kavanaugh, and Gorsuch, all said Lemon is in horrible. It created horrible problems, not only for the country but for all these lower court judges. And they all said it's not fair for us to apply it, 25 years ago and then not apply it now, because then they have to apply it because we haven't said it's not the standard anymore. So I think it's very likely that they're going to kill Lemon, which to me is
makes
worth
your job easier.
It's worth the last 40 years of everything we've done. I mean, we've just advanced the Constitution and we've stopped the hostility and the attacks on religious liberty that are occurring. I mean, if you're a local official and you don't know what to do, you just shut everything down, right? You just the government all becomes anti-religious, which the founders would be looking at and going, what is wrong with you people? That's not what we wrote. We're not supposed to be hostile to religion. So I think it's gone. The question, though, is what will they replace it with? And Gorsuch, I mean, for instance, there's a strategy in this. Okay, if you're getting up and making the oral argument, what do you argue for? Do you argue for a really strong coercion test that, doesn't strike hardly anything down? No, not in the oral argument. You want to kind of not scare everybody. So we argued for a softer version. And the pushback we got was from Gorsuch saying, I want a stronger version. Okay. And
no surprise there.
And so a lot of people reports on it would say, well, the justices were having no part of what the American Legion proposed. I was like, no, they wanted a stronger test than what we were proposing. But that's, I think, a smart strategy. Okay. They can go stronger than we just said. you got to at least get rid of Lemon and let's go back to the Constitution to a proper analysis of how you do this. And I think they're going to do that. It's just nobody knows what's going to happen exactly on how they're going to replace it. But I'll say this. Today, the justices go into a room and they vote.
That's right.
Just the
Glad you
9
brought that up.
justices on this case.
Yeah, we talked about that
So
yesterday.
and they could be doing it right now.
They
I
could
don't
be
know.
making the decision, getting the vote, the up or down vote. And nobody's in the room except the 9 justices.
That's
So
exactly
point
right.
of view listeners should be praying about that
Yeah.
right
Right
now.
now, be praying.
Glad you brought that up.
And let's say it's 5-4. Then they start writing the majority and the dissent over the next months, and they trade to try to convince people, you need to jump sides. Look, our arguments are better than yours. And so between now and June, late June, please continue praying, because this decision is not, there's going to be spiritual warfare going on. And so we need prayer cover on this, because we're at the cusp of changing 50 years of hostility to religion and of really warping our Constitution and creating all these problems. And we're also on the cusp of turning that all around to where we're a country that appreciates religious freedom, that doesn't attack religious symbols, and all the kind of things we used to people get up in arms over will be non-issues again. And it affects not just memorials and monuments and all that. I mean, it affects Coach Kennedy's case, right?
Does, yeah.
I mean, guys like Coach Kennedy don't get fired because they say a prayer. It affects a lot of things. And so please, I encourage people to be in prayer between now and the end of June.
Since we have to come to a break, we'll come back because I know Penna has some more questions,
Yep.
but I also want to point you to First Liberty for a couple of reasons. First of all, we have posted today, you can go to simply pointofview.net, and that one video is about 7 minutes long, and that might be something you might want to put on your Facebook page. It might be something you might want to watch. You can send it to somebody. Also, they are starting to populate it with other videos. The one with Chelsea, Chelsea's been with us. Matter of fact, she was with us last Friday. That video is only about a minute long, so you can watch that one and post that as well. On the upper right-hand corner, you might also notice that this was something we talked about last week, and that is you hired the Barna Research Group to go out and interview Americans, and no surprise there, 80% of them wanted to keep it standing. And a variety of others said, depending on the situation, you had all of 6% that wanted to bulldoze it down, which I guess would put them on the side of the humanists. And
Right.
If nothing else, I just love the fact that it is the American Legion versus the American Humanist Society. Pick your side, pretty easy there. So again, it's all at First Liberty. And as Kelly pointed out, something we talked about again yesterday, I talked about how important this vote right now that they probably are taking or just have taken will determine that. And it would really be nice to have a 7-2 decision rather than a 5-4, but you'll take whatever. A win is a win. So we'll see where that goes. And I think the cross will stand, but I'm also hoping that they will not tear down the cross, but they'll tear down the lemon test. And
Amen.
We'll talk more about that right after these important messages.
Roadside Attractions presents Run the Race. Two brothers share an unbreakable bond, but life's unexpected adversities put their future in question.
It's all part of his plan, right?
God does love you. He loves you like crazy.
From executive producers Tim Tebow and Robbie Tebow, Run the Race. Rated PG, parental guidance suggested. Now playing. More information is available at runtheracemovie.com.
Jesus said you could find a person's heart by where they invest their money. We at Point of View could not be more thankful that so many demonstrate a love for truth and for this nation by investing in our common mission. Of course, the reality is our team, our truth team, is a small percentage of those who listen. And right now, as they say in sports, we could use a deeper bench. For those who have given, thank you. And if you haven't made that step yet, take one now. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Show your heart for our future. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, Penna Dexter, Kelly Shakelford, again talking about the Bladensburg Cross. Been sitting there for 93 years, as I understand, 40 feet high, actually paying respect to 49 men from Prince George's County there in Maryland. And I'm excited because one of the stations they're talking about us picking up very soon will be in Annapolis, so it's just down the road from that. So that'd be kind of fun. But Penna, I know there's a lot more that we need to talk about because even after hearing the oral arguments, I know that Kelly's got some great stories about some of the interaction with the press and all sorts of other incredible stories that have come from what is taking place up there.
Yeah, and since I wasn't there, I'm not the one to tell the stories, but I do have a question for Kelly before we get some more of those stories. And that is, Kelly, I've watched this case for about 5 years. We've been talking about it here on Point of View and across the country. But you hear the memorial described not as a cross, but as a cross-shaped memorial, a veterans memorial. And you hear a lot about it being to honor the veterans. And this is the way, it was done in Europe. And so if the lemon test is struck down and we don't have that anymore, do we not have to go through that kind of thing where you call it a cross-shaped memorial instead of a cross? I mean, is that going to change that type of thing?
I think so. It'll stop all of it. I mean, the argument they make is that, well, this is a sectarian symbol. This divides. It's a sectarian symbol. It's not just a religious symbol. It's a sectarian symbol. It's a cross. Well, what we pointed out in the oral argument is every religious symbol is a sectarian symbol. There's no general religion symbol. I mean, whether it's a Star of David, a cross, you name it, it's sectarian. So if you're saying no sectarian symbols, then you're saying no religious symbols allowed. And that would mean no crosses allowed. So we, embraced it fully. We said, is it a cross? Is it a sectarian symbol? Is it the Christian symbol? Absolutely. So what is kind of what we said. And in fact, during the oral argument, it came up, I think it was Gorsuch that said it. He said, look, we're sitting in here, right above us is Moses with the 10 Commandments. We had to take that off. And then, Justice Alito turned to the American Humanist lawyer and said, how many are we supposed to now tear? If we rule your way, how many other crosses are we tearing down all across the country? What message do you think that sends? Do you think that's a neutral message that we're sending to the country? So it was, there were a lot of good points made, but now is the time for prayer. Again, if people want to see what happened or whatever, I mean, if they go to firstliberty.org, we have part of the press conference, I think, there.
Yes, we posted it too.
We're going to have some things there where we talk about where Mike Berry, our Deputy General Counsel, and Chelsea Yeoman, who's on Point of View a lot. The three of us we just taped something this morning where we talked about the different things that stood out to us, and that'll be available. So you can see all you want to on kind of what happened. But as far as what you can do, I would say twofold what you can do. Number one, send people to the website where they can sign the petition and say, I'm standing with the American Legion on this. And then number two, share that with other people so that they can know what is going on, and then we can get prayer widely, across the country, because this will probably be handed down in late June. And I think, by God's grace and by His power, and this is His case, but I think we're about to see a landmark decision that's going to change things for the future in a really good way.
I know there are a lot of people that hope so.
Yes.
Even people that aren't that religious, like different columns. And George Will, for instance, has written about it. And he's famously an atheist, but he wants to get rid of the lemon test. And it's needed. This is a needed sort of pivotal moment.
Yes.
And so you see that. You see the other religious groups, the other legal groups, and just people that are standing up for religious liberty, like Family Research Council and others. I've seen so much written in the run-up to the oral arguments, not just from people that are in our sort of tribe of conservative Christians, but a lot of others. So it's a momentous case.
And this
It really is.
And the thing is, there's a lot of history in this country of getting right up to the edge of winning this type of momentous case, and then right at the end, it falls apart. Okay, that's kind of what happened with Obamacare. That's what happened with things like, big cases to overturn Roe v. Wade. A lot of these, if you look at the history, they were about to do it, and somebody flipped.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I say it's important, because I think that's a lot of spiritual warfare going on people not doing what they know is right and what they know the Constitution says, but other pressures getting to them. And so we need to be praying so that really we get a good decision and that we don't have something go, the wrong direction when nobody's paying attention anymore because the argument's over and we're waiting for the opinion.
Wow. Okay. Well, and, just kind of pivoting a little bit, some of the stories, you documented some of them on video, but of people who are moved by this. And I just have to mention one. They're probably listening, but my daughter's in-laws both grew up in the Bladensburg area. And her father-in-law, he would drive by it every day. So when we started talking, and he's always been a Point of View fan and listener, so when we started talking about this, they were so excited. And this week they were praying. They texted me, and they were both very much in prayer for the oral arguments and the outcome. And so that's a local example of some folks here in the DFW area praying for this case.
Well, that's one of the things that was encouraging to me is I got a lot of text messages and emails and from different people, not only saying they were praying, but like saying we have a whole group of us that are praying, tomorrow morning or this afternoon or whatever. And so I think there was a lot of spontaneous people feeling the need to really lift this up in prayer. And there were a lot of great things that happened. I mean, after the argument, you walk out of the court and you go down those long steps, down to the bottom. And then to your left, there's this cache of microphones and, 40 TV cameras or whatever. And you walk up there and you say your piece and you answer questions. And as I was walking up there, is myself and Mike Carvin and Kevin Garnett, who's the National Judge Advocate for the American Legion. I looked, and to my right was Mary LeQuay. Her family is her ancestor is on that memorial.
Wow.
And I didn't know she was going to be there. And I said, well, come with us. And so she said, sure. I mean, I don't know. She's probably 4'1". I mean, she's not a tall lady. She is as sweet as she can be. And she said, okay. So she came with me. So here we are in front of this huge media throng. And so I'm thinking, I don't want, I'm not going to ask Mary to say anything. I mean, I don't know her well enough. I mean, she could probably freeze up and, fall over and have a heart attack if I do something like that in front of national media, right? And so we do our deal. We're doing the press conference. And as I finish, to my right is Nina Totenberg, who, probably people already know. Okay, she's liberal. She's the NPR, right?
Yeah.
She says, well, you can't just have her up here. She's got to say something. And I said, Mary, do you want to say anything? She said, sure. So she walks up in front of all those microphones, and she basically said, if they tore this down, it would be devastating to me and my family. And I thought, there's a God moment right there. He moved her in, he moved her up, and
gave her the courage.
Yeah. And that was really, really cool.
Why don't you tell the Michael Berry story?
Everybody
knows Michael Berry.
There's more of these, but there were a whole bunch of American Legion people down there. I think you can see these pictures. We had our own little press conference after the major press conference. But Mike Berry, who I think everybody knows is head of our military division and is deputy general counsel at First Liberty Institute, as he came down, he was talking to somebody. He looked to his right, and he caught out of his eye a woman with a poster with a young Marine on that in his dress blues. And he said, hold on a second. Mike did. And he walked over to her, and she said, this is my son. And Mike said, he said, I'm a Marine also. And she said, I lost my son in Afghanistan. And Mike's thinking, I served in Afghanistan, and I lost good friends in Afghanistan. And she just looked at him. She said, I came out here because I don't want this cross to go down.
Wow.
And she said, and if it does, they're going to Arlington next, and my son's in Arlington. And
wow.
So just powerful, some of the things that happened out there. And this is going to affect a lot of people in a lot of ways they don't even know. And so put this on your prayer list. This is, I think, we're at the hinge point of history. I walked up to Mike Carvin right before he argued the case. And I said, Mike, a lot of people praying for you. I said, but you know what? I don't think it matters because God's got this case and it doesn't matter what you do. and so he did a good job. But I think this is the time to get rid of all this hostility to religion that is not what our country is about and to move back to what it was founded upon. And let's hope and pray that with the proper justices now that we have on the court, that might be about to happen.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to make some comments, that is certainly your prerogative. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
Conservative heads are spinning with successive announcements of presidential candidacies, complete with promises to enact expensive government programs. Let's pick one, government daycare. It's really preschool because the proposal references curriculum standards. Senator and presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren proposes federal subsidies for universal early education and childcare. In the wealthiest country on the planet, she argues, access to affordable and high-quality childcare and early education should be a right, not a privilege reserved for the rich. The plan, which will cost $700 billion over 10 years, will fund a network of locally run childcare facilities. The program will be free for poor and middle-class families. Others will pay fees on a sliding scale based on income, with no family paying over 7% of its income for childcare. The current average is 9 to 36%. This will be funded via a tax on wealth the senator has proposed previously. Daycare is parents' least favorite childcare option. A 2012 Pew Research study found that 2/3 of mothers prefer not to work full-time, but to work part-time or stay at home with their children. If they need daycare, they'd like it to be family or church-based. Even Senator Warren didn't put her own kids in daycare. She flew in a relative. The Warren plan states that child care providers receiving federal funds must, quote, meet standards that now apply to Head Start. The Heritage Foundation's Lindsay Burke points out that Head Start is far from a success story when it comes to participant outcomes. Lindsay Burke says Head Start needs reforming to offer more choice to low-income parents. Of the Warren plan, she writes, creating another benefit for universal child care merely establishes a new federal subsidy for middle-class and upper-income families. One more point. We should not be creating new ways to place little children in the government indoctrination pipeline. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we want to not only focus on what was happening this week in front of the Supreme Court, I do want to talk about what was happening in the House of Representatives. Now, you will find that we've posted a couple of different articles because one is entitled Republicans Score Rare Victory in the House. I'll explain that in just a minute. But next to it is an article, Pelosi will punish Democrats who vote with Republicans. Now, you might remember, I think even yesterday, I spent some time talking about the bill that was actually passed in the House of Representatives. It's called the Bipartisan Background Checks Act. We're not going to get so much into the Second Amendment issue and background checks as much as in the midst of this, It is kind of interesting. And Kelly, I'd love to get your thoughts about this because I thought this was an important story. I just noticed a while ago, even Rush Limbaugh led with his story about this. So I thought, okay, this is good because it's a good example of stuff that is happening that you might not read in the mainstream press. And that's why we try to bring some stories to you. And that is, even though Democrats control the House, there are some procedural actions that can be taken. One is a motion to recommit, which allows for various kinds of amendments. And what the Republicans did is say, okay, if you're going to pass this particular background check bill, then we also want to make sure that anybody who is here illegally, who tries to buy a gun, that you have to notify ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Now, this is something that Democrats did not want to do, but some of these moderate Republicans did. And now what you have
and
is...
moderate Democrats, too.
Yeah, moderate Democrats and all these. And so as a result, Nancy Pelosi said, wait a minute, moderate Democrats, you've got to stop voting with Republicans. Penna, pick it up from there.
Well, yeah, and it's like Ocasio-Cortez, apparently, when she saw this motion to recommit, she almost voted against the whole background check bill because she hates ICE so much that she didn't want to vote for that. But, this is something the Democrats always would do whenever they gain control, is they're going to try to control your guns. And so they want this background check bill. And so the Republicans put this in there. And some moderates, politically, they just pretty much had to support that. It was be in their best interest. And everybody is just trying to impose some sort of party discipline. Pelosi, for one reason, because she's the leader and she wants everybody together. But Ocasio-Cortez, who seems to have so much clout right now, is, anytime anybody does anything to cross her, she starts threatening to find a primary opponent for them. And so now you have to hew to the far left, and you have to vote right, or you're going to get the wrath of these two ladies and others. And it just goes to show first of all, the fact that everybody has to vote the way the leader says has always kind of bothered me.
Yeah, whether it's Republican or Democrat.
Yes, either side.
Yeah. But you maybe could see a John Boehner doing that occasionally. You really didn't see a Paul Ryan doing it that much. But this is just, I think, Kelly, a good illustration that some of these, first of all, moderate Democrats have some questions about this issue anyway. And second of all, if you're a moderate Democrat and you're in a particular precinct or a particular congressional district that was controlled and won by Donald Trump, you got to really pay attention to whether or not this might be the one opportunity that you have to serve in Congress, because you'll be thrown out the next time.
Yeah, I think this is going to happen a lot for the Democrats, because what's happening is even somebody that we might all consider a liberal Democrat, now they look moderate because they're all these socialists. And again, I'm not calling them names. This is what they call themselves.
That's what they call themselves.
Right?
It's fair.
So you've got these extreme positions now being foisted on the entire Democratic Party. The Green New Deal, right? Abortion even after they're born, meaning infanticide.
Medicare for all.
Medicare for all,
mm-hmm.
right? A universal wage, right? That everybody's entitled to be paid a certain wage, even if they don't work.
Yep.
There's a long list of these, but they're radical. They're things that most Americans don't agree with. It might be important if you're in the Democratic primary. This is your red meat, socialism,
mm-hmm.
Issues that. So they're going to run to the left and push these really extreme positions. But if you're a Democrat and you're not a socialist and you'd like to be reelected, you're going to have to do this kind of thing. Now, Nancy Pelosi is usually pretty shrewd politically, so I think she probably will, realize she's got to give these people room to do that, or she's going to lose them all. And we'll see. But they're in this really strange time where if they, what they have to do to get the base behind them in these presidential, candidacies is going to destroy them in the general election. And that's why many people are hoping that Biden runs, because again, although he had always been considered liberal,
he's now our moderate.
Yeah, he's now the moderate because he's not a socialist. And so I think this is just part of what we're going to see a lot more of by people in the Democratic Party who are savvy politicians and realize if I start going with all of that socialism stuff, I'm not going to be back. And so they're going to have to distance themselves in ways like that.
Now, this is the common sense that this motion to recommit makes. I mean, granted, it's dropped at the very last minute, and that makes some people upset, and they say it's a poison pill for the legislation, all that. But there's what's called a banned buyer list, and on that banned buyer list is illegal immigrants, also fugitives, those under indictment, drug addicts, domestic violent cases. And so being an illegal immigrant is supposed to keep you from being able to purchase a firearm. That's a common sense.
That's just common sense. And then just to alert ICE.
Yeah.
We got some questions about that. So let's take one of those real quickly just before we take a break here in South Carolina on the Good News Network. Nick, I think you have a question for Kelly Shackelford.
Yeah, I've been wanting to ask him this for a while now, what his take is on red flag laws. I think they're picking up steam. I know some states have passed them, and I guess they're working on a national one because I know Senator Graham, my senator, Jekyll and Hyde, I call him. I think he's working on this, and I wanted to see what Kelly's take is as far as due process.
Yeah, I think the red flag laws are a horrible idea. It violates everything about our system of individual rights in the Constitution. We don't presume people guilty and then they get a chance to prove themselves innocent. I mean, that's like France or somewhere else. It's another country. It's certainly not the United States. So the gun owners of America, I know, immediately came out on this and have been really consistent on it, and I think they've done a good job. But these red flag laws are, need to be red flagged because they're a bad idea.
Well said.
And again, you can't. It's not right to have people presumed guilty of something. And can you imagine if we did this for free speech?
That's what I was just thinking. Move from the Second Amendment to First Amendment.
Right.
You can't speak unless you can prove that what you're going to speaking on is going to be acceptable.
That's right. Or religion. You can't exercise your religion unless, you get your way off this list that we, the government, have put you on. I mean, everybody immediately realizes, no, we don't do that. That's wrong. It's the same way with the Second Amendment.
Yeah. Well, again, a real quick answer to that question. And again, we'll get to some of the others after the break. But I thought, if nothing else, I just want to let you know that there is going to be always media coverage about the turmoil within the Republican Party. But I think what we're seeing here is a remarkable amount of turmoil right now between the Democratic Party. And the example I've used already is you want to see Cal Thomas's recent column in which he said, I didn't think I'd ever write this, but I agree with Dianne Feinstein, who was confronted the other day by a number of youngsters, some very young, some teenagers, about the Green New Deal. And she finally just said, look, you don't know what you're talking about. I've been here for years. This is not going to pass the Senate. And it's just finally having somebody being an adult in the room. And so it's kind of intriguing. But we have a lot of questions and comments, so we'll take some of those phone calls and go to the website, and especially to First Liberty. We'll be back right after this.
Question: do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about MediShare.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With MediShare, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with MediShare, and they actually like MediShare more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of MediShare.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less, and they like it more. No wonder MediShare is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, and it is our weekend edition. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shakelford, and certainly a lot of very important issues on the table. And, of course, you were telling some stories about the Supreme Court, but Stuart Shepard, who you know because he works with you at First Liberty, he had this one picture of this woman that it had a picture of the Capitol, and it said, "This is not religious." And he said, I didn't have the heart to tell this humanist that actually for decades church services were held there in the Capitol. But anyway, that's one of those fun stories about that. But we've been talking about the establishment of religion. You know, there's another part, free exercise. And you sent this on to me because there are some members of the House and Senate that would like to amend the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And I thought it might be good for just a minute to talk about that, because it's another aspect of what you've been dealing with at First Liberty. Almost all these cases are establishment of religion cases. Few are free exercise. Coach Kennedy would be one of those. But it all goes back to Antonin Scalia. The other day when I had his son on the program talking about the book, I brought up all the good things that Justice Scalia brought down. But one of the worst, I think you'd agree, has to do with a case called Smith out of Oregon. I think it was in 1990. Had to do with smoking peyote. And he agreed with the liberals and really just sort of shut down the whole area of free exercise. And so that's why we have the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And even liberal Democrats at that time supported it. Mm-hmm. Now it shows you that the Democratic Party of 2019 is not the Democratic Party of 1990 by any stretch of the imagination. Fill in the gaps, if you might.
Well, all that did is this: the way that the free exercise of religion always worked in this country is that if the government burdens a person's free exercise of religion, then the burden of proof is on the government to come forward and show it has a compelling governmental interest that requires it to do that, and that it's burdening your religion in the least restrictive means it can to meet that compelling interest. So, for instance, let's say you said, well, you know, part of my religion is sacrificing children. Well, you know, we have a compelling governmental interest in protecting innocent children and not allowing you to sacrifice them in the volcano or whatever, okay? And there's no least restrictive means in that case of protecting that without stopping you from killing your children. So it's just a matter of burden, right? Where's the burden of proof? It's on the government. So everybody has religious freedom, and the burden's on the government if it's going to interfere, and it's got a high burden to meet. Mm-hmm. Well, the Smith decision said, yeah, I know it's always been that way, but we're changing that. If the government passes a law that is neutral and generally applicable on its face, what that means is it's not aiming at you, then there's no violation of the free exercise of religion. Well, I mean, that means they can wipe out any religious belief they want as long as they cover enough people. So, for instance, they could say no alcohol to minors. And then they say, hey, we've heard that those Catholic priests are given alcohol during communion. And they can go in there and arrest the priest. And if the priest were to say, hey, wait a second, I'm protected by the free exercise of religion, they say, oh, no, I'm sorry, that doesn't apply here because this statute applied to everybody. And so it just decimated religious freedom as far as the free exercise clause. So if you're in my business of doing claims under the First Amendment for religious freedom, everybody just started bringing free speech cases because you couldn't win free exercise cases. And, immediately there was such an outrage on the left and the right that religious freedom was being taken away and the government was being given this new power that everybody said, we got to pass a statute to restore this until we get justices on the Supreme Court that want to do the right thing. So Bill Clinton signed into law.
That's true.
The Religious Freedoms Restoration Act, which was almost unanimously passed. And Chuck Schumer and Kennedy were the leaders.
Yep.
And so anyway, very non-controversial because, liberals, conservatives, everybody should believe in religious freedom. Well, now bring forward to current. Now, all of a sudden, after all these years, the ACLU and the gay rights groups and all the LGBT groups and everything, they've all decided they don't like RFRA anymore. So they want it changed. I think they're calling it the Do No Harm.
That's right.
Right?
Do No Harm Act.
Yeah.
Yep.
And whenever you see a name like that, you know it's the opposite of what they're saying, which is, in this case,
much harm.
What they want is, they say, we want to change so this doesn't apply when it comes to LGBT issues, for instance.
Because you're going to harm a certain community.
So in other words, you have no religious freedom here. So if we pass a law and tell you what your religious beliefs have to be on, LGBT issues, you have no defense because you don't have any religious freedom.
There you go.
And that's what they're asking for in this bill, which is now proposed. My guess is it'll pass the House with the current House we have. And it kind of is it's scary that we've gotten to this point.
So we've got RFRA.
Yeah, we've got it. Yeah. It's the idea of religious freedom is it's got to work against whatever is popular of the day. You've got to have the religious freedom to disagree, to follow your own faith. If whatever's popular today now, trumps your religious freedom, then you don't have religious freedom. And it's going to be gone for everybody.
Again, I might just mention for our listeners in Massachusetts, one of the sponsors is Joe Kennedy III. For our listeners in Virginia, one of the sponsors there is Bobby Scott. And, of course, for our listeners in California, no surprise there, Senator Kamala Harris, as well as many others. So those are just a few that I can mention real quickly that are certainly pushing that forward. Now, it will pass possibly the House. I don't see it going anywhere in the Senate. And it's also kind of just another one of those issues. We've been talking up until now about kind of the establishment of religion across. Free exercise, doesn't that get back to Coach Kennedy in one of the cases you're dealing with right now?
It does. We went up to the Supreme Court I think most people know Coach Kennedy was fired for going to a knee after the football game was over to say a 15 to 20 second silent prayer. Ninth Circuit Federal Court of Appeals said coaches are not allowed to pray in public if anybody can see them, which is just a shocking ruling.
Crazy.
And we went to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court denied cert, which normally is horrible. It means your case is over. But they did something very unusual. They issued for the justices, the more conservative justice, issued a concurring opinion and said, it's cert denial for now. We want you to go back down. There's a fact we want you to have the trial court, rule on. And basically, if you win that, you should win, which it'll be easy for us to prove. They also said, by the way, the Ninth Circuit opinion below was deeply troubling. And they said, in fact, we can't even believe that they mean what they said. And then, to everybody's shock, at the end of they just gratuitously said, hey, we noticed that the free exercise claim below hasn't made it to us yet, only the free speech claim. Maybe that's because this Smith decision so damaged religious freedom.
There you go.
And they said, but we haven't been asked to review that yet. So not a subtle hint. They're
saying First Liberty, bring it on.
Yeah, we're on the verge of possibly overturning Smith. And if we do that, it won't matter what they eventually try to do with this statute because we'll all have religious freedom and full free exercise protection again for the first time in 30 years.
Got to take a break. Penna, I know you got some questions. I know I do. And again, just fascinating. All the things happening that you're only probably hearing about right here on Point of View. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Psychiatrist Lyle Rossiter wrote an article many years ago with the simple title, Follow the Rules. He has noticed among his clients and among Americans in general an unwillingness to follow basic rules in various arenas. As he points out, there are consequences for breaking the rules in 5 areas. In the care of our bodies, we have to obey the rules of physics, chemistry, and biology. When we break these rules, we get fat, we get sick, we even die. Moreover, the epidemics of substance abuse and STDs also illustrate the principle of sowing and reaping. In marital and family relations, we have to follow certain rules of fidelity, thoughtfulness, and responsibility. When we don't, divorce and broken families result. Children are raised without both parents and grow up with emotional scars or deficits. In economic transactions, we have to obey the laws of supply, demand, price, and scarcity. Failure to do so results in consumer debt and bankruptcy. In social behavior, we have to follow the rules of honesty, fairness, mutuality, and courtesy. If we disobey those rules, we have social turmoil. In political transactions, we have to follow the rules set out in our Constitution that protect individuals from harmful actions by governments. Breaking those rules leads to political corruption and chaos. If these are the rules, why do we fail to follow them? Rossiter believes it is because we are driven by sexual and aggressive impulses, by attachment and dependent impulses, by acquisitive and narcissistic impulses. These are the rules for success. Follow them and you're likely to succeed. Break them and you will probably fail. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From roadside attractions, Run the Race. 2 brothers share an unbreakable bond, but life's unexpected adversities put their future in question. Run the Race, rated PG, now playing.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I might just mention that Penna Dexter will be with me for the entire hour. Kelly's going to have to leave in just a few minutes. And again, I guess you're going to be with our Fred Todd Starnes, right?
That's right.
And so while we have you here for a few more minutes, just to finish the point, because as we've talked about, you are seeing the possibility of remaking the whole view of the Establishment Clause. And then I just thought I'd bring in, you might also be in the future being able to remake the Free Exercise Clause. And we'd be bringing the First Amendment, both clauses in the First Amendment, back to the constitutional foundation it was intended.
Yeah, it's, I've been doing this 30 years. This is my 30th year. And, I never thought I would see even one of these things happening probably in my lifetime. I mean, you want to make progress, but to see everything basically begin to totally change. It's almost like I've been dropping seeds my whole life and waiting for the plants to come through, and they're coming through on steroids, and they're like 10 feet tall, Now, it hadn't happened yet, but it's all right in front of us, and we're seeing it happen. And so lemon might be gone. And if you said to me, what would be a great success in your life in the religious freedom legal arena? Get rid of lemon under the Establishment Clause would probably be number one. And under the Free Exercise Clause, it would be overturn Smith. And they're both in the process of possibly happening, which will unleash a religious freedom that none of us have had in our lifetime, and would go back to the founders' vision for the country that they put in the Constitution that we hadn't been following. And it's hard for people to understand what that means. But, I mean, right now, whenever religion occurs in public, people tense up. They think, is this okay? Or is somebody going to get in
And
trouble?
that should not be.
No. And can you imagine if instead nobody tensed up? Everybody went, oh, we love religion in America. We love religious freedom. There, an openness, a calling for people to live out their faith. I mean, it's a totally different culture. And that's what the founders wanted. They wanted religious diversity, but they wanted freedom. And so we're on the cusp of these things, and I don't know how long it'll take. I mean, let's say they don't get rid of Lemon. Let's say they knock, they mortally wound Lemon, then we got to come back in another case to put it out of its misery. I don't know. Let's say they do it, but they're not yet to where they need to go back to what the Constitution says, or same thing with the free exercise clause. But the point is, it's happening. Now, why is all this happening? It's happening because we're putting judges and justices on the court who actually want to follow the written word of the Constitution and not sort of do their political legislative work as a judge. They're doing their proper role. And so that's one of the things that really, from the oral argument, one of the things that I left the most with, and I wish people ought to go and read or listen to the oral argument. I can't tell you how many people walked out of that room with me and said, man, I love Justice Gorsuch. He is so on top of it. He's smart. He's right to the point, and he is great on religious freedom. And Kavanaugh was excellent as well. They're the two newest, and so I'm looking there, and I was just thinking, this is great to have these two justices as our new two justices on the Supreme Court. They're going to be excellent, and so that's why we're actually seeing we now have 5 members of the Supreme Court who actually think originalism is the proper approach, which means when it comes to the Constitution, we should actually follow what the Constitution says.
I don't know what this news outlet that put this headline up came from. You sent it, Kelly. But the headline was, "The wall of separation is about to collide with wrecking balls named Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh."
Yeah, I think that was Think Progress. It was one of the left-wing groups.
Yeah.
And which is great. It's like wall of separation.
What's that?
Show me where that's in the Constitution.
Yeah. Can't find that in there.
It's not in the Constitution. And even when they use the concept, they misuse the concept because it's not in the Constitution anyway. And so it shouldn't be. It should get the wrecking ball. It should be. We're not asking about walls of separation, which is, by the way, something written by Jefferson over a decade after the Constitution was passed. We should be asking what the words of the Constitution says, which in this case should be, did Congress pass a law establishing religion? Is this a law respecting the establishment of religion? Are we establishing a national church? Are we establishing a national denomination? That's what we should be asking. That's what the words say. And if the answer is no, then we don't strike it down, and we don't have the government sort of sniffing around for any religious symbols to see what they need to eradicate, because the founders never wanted that. That's not what they did. That's not what they're for. So I think, the liberals got it right here, although they're not real happy about it in their headline. And I think this is a good time. It's just we're on the cusp of it, and so let's pray. Let's make sure we get across the finish line with these things, because we're talking about really changing the future of our country in a really good way for religious freedom.
This other idea of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and trying to replace it with the Do No Harm Act also comes back to Kai Feldblum, who was saying basically if there's a conflict between religious liberty and LGBT, religious liberty loses. And so this is really the intent of this particular legislation. True?
Absolutely. And so what it is essentially saying is religious freedom is now the lowest of all the civil rights, which I'm sure our founders would be so enlightened by. I mean, that's why
the country was started, right? So we could get rid of religion, right?
But that's how warped they're trying to, with what they're trying to do. But, the good news is the cases and everything right now are moving in the right direction. And so we just need to pray. I mean, one of the other things I didn't even talk about is the other thing that was before, the 9 justices today went into a room. I assume they've already done it by now. They went into a room, just the 9 of them, to vote on how they're going to decide the Bladensburg Cross, the Veterans Memorial. what I didn't mention is they also have something else on their list for today. The Sweet Cakes case.
Oh, that's right.
The Klein's case.
They were in Melissa Klein.
The Oregon bakers who were fined $135,000 and were ordered not to speak publicly their beliefs about marriage, and whose business has been bankrupted because they wouldn't do a same-sex wedding cake because of their faith. That case was for the first time before the justices today for them to vote on whether they're going to accept that case and set it for oral argument. It's interesting what's all happening, and we don't know the timing and what case they will take and what the Lord's doing, but I think it's a really good time for religious freedom, and I think we're moving back to what the Constitution and the founders intended.
Again, you can go to First Liberty, find out a little bit more. We have some of the videos already up there, but you're going to have that 3-person roundtable. We already have the Chelsea one, which is just a short one. Of course, we have the video from that press conference, which is really fun because you got all the American Legion people behind you with all the different hats and those kinds of things. You have the study, the test. And most importantly, we do really want to encourage people to pray, right, for these next few months before it comes down.
I would encourage people. I mean, I bet everybody's got a prayer list or a group of friends or whatever. I mean, grab whatever off the website, whatever thing you want to grab that you think most tells the story that would communicate to your friends, and send it to them and say, pray. Let's all pray. Let's pray through June. And if you're not already getting the emails from us, sign up for that, and then you'll be able to, you'll know as soon as the decision comes down, because we'll let you know. And you can be praying from now and then, knowing that there's a battle going on behind the scenes at that court, and we're not going to know what's going to happen until they release it in late June.
Well, again, we're going to need to take a break. And first of all, Penna, when we come back, your piece on government daycare, I want to get into that.
Okay.
One more point before we certainly say goodbye for the end of this weekend, and that is that we still have an opportunity for you to either thank or disagree with your 2 senators on how they voted on the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. So that's up there. I'm going to change that out next week, so I wanted to make sure that you have that. If you want to find out more about First Liberty, certainly you can connect the picture there by Kelly Shakelford, or simply go to First Liberty. We come back, I want to talk about a couple of issues, and one of those is government daycare, but some others as well. One of the things we talked about, and David French got into this, is there's a real push right now that Democrats might say, we want to get rid of the filibuster, because they've come to realize that even if we could get a Democrat president, a Democratic-controlled House, which they have right now, and a Democratic-controlled Senate, they still couldn't pass things like Medicare for All and the Green New Deal and all the rest. And since you already had Harry Reid get rid of the filibuster for judicial nominees, maybe that's the way they can pass things like government daycare and Green New Deal and a variety of others. So we'll get into that and have that conversation as well. And this last half hour, I know most of you just wanted to sit back and listen to Kelly. He's going to go on to his next activity, but we will open up the phones again and give you a chance to join the conversation. 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter's commentary on the Viewpoints page. You can read that, and we'll talk about it right after this.
Here's some great news. If you missed the deadline to sign up for health insurance, or more importantly, if you sign up for a plan that you're just not happy with, you still have a choice. It's called Medi-Share, and Medi-Share is a Christian healthcare sharing program. It's been around for 25 years. They have more than 400,000 members now around the country. And get this, over the years, Medi-Share members have shared more than $2 billion of each other's medical bills, so they could help share your needs too. And best of all, you could save a lot of money with Medi-Share. The typical savings for a family is around $500 a month. Your savings could be more or less, but think about what you could do with that extra money every month. So if you think you're stuck with a high-cost health plan that doesn't have much to offer, think again. You can join Medi-Share anytime, so call them today and check it out. There's no pressure. They're super easy to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. Let me open up the phones. Again, Kelly Shakelford had to go on to his next venue, and we certainly understand that. Penna Dexter with me still. And again, I might just mention that Penna will be hosting the program on Monday. You'll certainly want to listen to that. Dr. Frank Wright will be with you. We're going to have in studio Carmen Pate. Some of our listeners that have been listening to Point of View for some time might remember Carmen Pate. She'll be in studio, so that'll be a lot of fun.
I am so excited for that. And for Dr. Wright, because...
Yes.
You know, we've been talking about big government and socialism and how there's a whole generation that may, be intrigued by it in a sense. And he's very, very concerned about that.
Yes.
And what are some of the Christian principles about socialism? So that's what I will discuss with Dr. Frank Wright.
Just a few of the individuals that you'll have a chance to hear, and that will be Monday, and then we'll all through the week be talking about a variety of different issues. But one of the things I always encourage you to do is to sign up and receive our Viewpoints commentary. And Penna, over the last week, seemed like every time I turned around, ran into somebody else that said, I read your commentary. And so that means that my commentaries come to your inbox Monday through Friday. The one we have posted right now on government daycare will come to your inbox tomorrow. So if you would like to receive that or any of those free, there's just this red little button there that says sign up. But this is a good example of something else that is being put forward primarily by Senator Elizabeth Warren. But tell us a little bit more about that, because it then gets us into something else, because we talked even yesterday about this idea of trying to end the filibuster. The picture they have there is Elizabeth Warren. And I think there is a realization that if they're going to implement government daycare, Green New Deal, Medicare for all, a so-called living wage for everyone, as well as abolishing ICE and a number of other things, they're going to have to get rid of the filibuster. So we'll get to that in just a minute. But talk about how it is at least possible that the United States would find itself implementing government daycare.
It seems to happen whenever liberals get in power and they start talking about this. This one is, Terry Jeffrey at CNS News calls it Warren Care. And he also says it's a brainwashing babysitter. But what it is government subsidies for universal early child education and daycare. So they talk about universal preschool, and this really is preschool, because in it there is requirements that it meets certain standards of Head Start, which is preschool for under low-income kids. And so, there's still going to be Head Start, which has its own issues. But this is more of a middle-class, even upper-class entitlement, giving universal preschool to everyone. So that's a problem in itself. Number one, the cost, but also number two, putting them in the government pipeline for education instead of at 5 years old for public schools, 3 years old for preschool. Do we really need or want to do something like that? They say the cost of it will be $700 billion over 10 years. It will fund a network of locally run child care facilities. It'll be free for poor people, but we already have Head Start anyway for the poor. And for many middle-class families, also be free. Others will pay fees on a sliding scale. So the interesting part of this, Kerby, is that when you talk to young parents, they don't want daycare is either too expensive for them, which, that's what she's trying to address, but they also think it's just too institutional. And what most people want is either not to have the mom home, to have her at home or working part-time so she can take care of her own kids, or have a family member taking care of the kids, or maybe more of a church run, something that's right along with your values. Instead, this is another one of those one-size-fits-all big government programs. So Elizabeth Warren is proposing this, and Terry Jeffrey says, to Warren, parents who take care of their own preschool children are victims of a class war. So basically, she is turning free Americans who want to raise their children with their own values by their own selves or their family into victims.
Yes. Well, and again, this issue on daycare is similar to the one we talked about parental leave. If a company wants to provide parental leave, great. But when the government steps in, they say, well, this is how you have to do it with these kinds of stipulations. If a company wants to provide daycare, I'm well aware of an individual that made it a point of actually having a daycare on the first floor where the moms worked on the second floor. But again, they had the freedom to make it as religious or non-religious as they want, as flexible as they want. But as soon as government steps in, because some people might say, well, don't you think some people need daycare? Well, maybe they do, but I want them to be able to make decisions. And that once government's involved, it's going to make it very secular. It's going to make it very institutional. And there are going to be all sorts of rules and regulations that are going to make it nothing like the kind of daycare that parents are looking for right now.
Yeah. And really, you can indoctrinate children from a very young age, even 3 years old. And if you are going to, have these, centers, and maybe they're going to be small, but they're going to, even if it's small and sort of community based, just like in the schools, you'll start to have a bureaucracy with certain requirements for what's taught and what can't be taught. Mm-hmm. And just, think about the transgender agenda. What about...
Oh, sure.
Yeah. What about I'm also having, in a couple weeks when I'm hosting, I'm having Jeff Younger back, who's dealing here in Dallas with this whole push to have his own son. He's a believer. His own little 6-year-old son raised as a girl. This kind of thing will be injected, obviously, because already the LGBT sexual revolution type agenda trumps religion in many cases, and the left is trying to make that happen. So that's another fear, that should preclude it for Christians right off the bat. So that's war and care.
Let's go back to a couple of decades ago, because I remember you used to be talking about at that time it was the First Lady Hillary Clinton and her book, It Takes a Village to Raise a Child. And the argument there is, well, look what the French daycare system is like. We should have that in the United States. We've been having this conversation for decades, haven't we?
We have. And the French, yes, they have a nice, well-subsidized daycare system. They also... The country is having a lot of problems financially, and they also do encourage parents, though, in a lot of ways. And a lot of moms have a lot of freedom to stay home and take care of their kids. They get some help there, so they recognize the value of women in the home raising their own kids, and that's what this is a socialist proposal. It really truly is. And so it's just one of the many that, the long list that we are compiling here at Point of View that starts with the Green New Deal and goes on to Medicare for All. This is another part of that.
Well, and it kind of brings to the conversation something we talked about yesterday. David French said if Democrats end the filibuster, it could break American politics. And the reason he brought that up is there was first an op-ed that appeared in the New York Times. Since then, there have been a couple of op-eds and editorials that have all said, look, we got to be real honest about this. There is really no way that we're going to pass, in this particular case, a government daycare or the Green New Deal or Medicare for All or abolish ICE or all sorts of other particular issues if we always have to meet that 60-vote requirement in the Senate. And since you had Harry Reid, who when he was the Senate Majority Leader, ending the filibuster for judicial nominees, it's why you're starting to hear a lot more Democrats talking about getting rid of the filibuster. Now, I've always thought that filibuster seemed a little unfair because if you could come up with 41 senators, they could stop what 59 senators wanted to do. So it seemed a little bit unfair that a minority could prevent the implementation of the majority. But if you want to see really radical proposals making their way through the Senate, just remind you of the fact that a Democratic Congress passed the Affordable Care Act without one Republican vote at a time when we have the filibuster. Can you imagine what would fly through the Senate? Things like this.
We can talk about this a little bit after the break, but to abolish the filibuster for nominees was one thing, because a lot of people have the idea, and I agree, that the president should have the right to his nominees. And really, it has to be something outrageous and egregious for him to be denied that. But in laws, sometimes democracy runs wild. And when it does, the minority can be protective. And that's what one of the reasons for the filibuster. Now, it's been abused definitely. So maybe there could be some restrictions, but abolishing it would be a disaster.
I think so, too. And again, this is something I'm going to watch because I'm starting to compile, as you are, this list of all the things that might make their way into the Democratic platform. The argument always has been Republicans have gotten much more conservative. Really? I mean, Donald Trump, you think of him as that conservative, but okay. But really, the Democratic platform has changed remarkably, even in the last 4 to 6 years. The Republican platform is pretty much the same one it was in 2000. But now you're starting to see some radical things being proposed. And the only way those could make their way through the Senate would be to end the filibuster. So let's take a break. We'll talk a little bit more about what that might mean. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
Conservative heads are spinning with successive announcements of presidential candidacies, complete with promises to enact expensive government programs. Let's pick one, government daycare. It's really preschool because the proposal references curriculum standards. Senator and presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren proposes federal subsidies for universal early education and childcare. In the wealthiest country on the planet, she argues, access to affordable and high-quality childcare and early education should be a right, not a privilege reserved for the rich. The plan, which will cost $700 billion over 10 years, will fund a network of locally run childcare facilities. The program will be free for poor and middle-class families. Others will pay fees on a sliding scale based on income, with no family paying over 7% of its income for childcare. The current average is 9 to 36%. This will be funded via a tax on wealth the senator has proposed previously. Daycare is parents' least favorite childcare option. A 2012 Pew Research study found that 2/3 of mothers prefer not to work full-time, but to work part-time or stay at home with their children. If they need daycare, they'd like it to be family or church-based. Even Senator Warren didn't put her own kids in daycare. She flew in a relative. The Warren plan states that child care providers receiving federal funds must, quote, meet standards that now apply to Head Start. The Heritage Foundation's Lindsay Burke points out that Head Start is far from a success story when it comes to participant outcomes. Lindsay Burke says Head Start needs reforming to offer more choice to low-income parents. Of the Warren plan, she writes, creating another benefit for universal child care merely establishes a new federal subsidy for middle-class and upper-income families. One more point. We should not be creating new ways to place little children in the government indoctrination pipeline. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and let me just mention again that Penna Dexter's commentary is available to you. You can sign up, and it's on the website right now if you'd like to know a little bit more about government daycare. But it kind of brings us, Penna, to a very significant list that seems to be growing, and it is illustrated by Michael Barone's piece, Democrats are Getting Out on a Dangerously Left-Wing Limb. I've made the short list here: Medicare for All, which is single payer, Green New Deal, abortion till birth, and now almost after, free college tuition, guaranteed basic income, even the idea of a living wage of $15 an hour, abolish ICE, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Of course, the one you just mentioned, government daycare, and at least for a while, Kamala Harris even saying eliminate private health insurance. I'm thinking that most people in Middle America, and there are a lot of people still in Middle America, would be going, one of those is enough to be concerning. If all of those become the party platform for the presidential candidate and essentially the party platform for members that run for Congress, I just don't think they do very well in the next election. But maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I don't either. That's why I have mixed feelings about it. I don't like that they're getting out there talking about it, because the way they talk about it is so dishonest. They talk about the people who are suffering, for instance, maybe people whose income doesn't quite make it till the end of the month. So the government has to come in and guarantee somebody a basic income so some people don't have to work. It's really the idea that, we don't all need to work in a country. And we do. I mean, it's biblical. And that's why I'm glad Frank Wright's going to be coming in, because he's going to be talking about some of the biblical principles of an economy.
Yes.
But, they're getting out, according to Michael Barone, and this is a good piece in Town Hall, that it's a dangerously left-wing limb that the Democrats are getting out on. And I do think they lose. I think they win primaries in some cases, and they lose elections. And so that's good for Republicans, but it's not good that we have so many people that are willing to sign on to this type of thing. And the danger, too, is that the largest generation, of course, of voters, the millennials, many of them have not been educated in, they almost vote emotionally, and some of these left-wing programs and proposals tug at the emotions because they're talking about the underprivileged. But what they're doing is changing systems that have been working for everyone to deal with the few who are suffering.
And again, I love what Michael Barone does because it gives us the historical perspective. It reminds us of something I hadn't really thought about. Richard Nixon is one of only 2 Americans who actually was nominated for national office 5 times. The other one was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And he always said that, both parties run to their wings, left for the Democrats, right for the Republicans. But the left running is so much further to the left than it was a few years ago, because later on he reminds us of one more I'll put on my list: reparations. Well, after a while, it's like, okay, can we find anything else that would be controversial to the American people and recognize that what's going to happen, and Dr. Merrill Matthews has said this before, the candidate that's going to get the most attention from the media are the ones that are going to be saying some of the more radical things. So there's going to be a tendency, perhaps, in the primary. And a lot of people say, well, the primaries are not till next year. Do you realize that the first Democrat debate is in June this year because they're moving it up?
Yeah.
I'm hoping maybe to weed some people out, I suspect, because they don't want to have the same thing happen where you had 17 Republicans running last time. But again, you're going to have individuals that if they're going to get any attention whatsoever, they're going to be talking about some really remarkable kinds of proposals. And a good illustration is one of those individuals is Bernie Sanders. Well, when he introduced years ago his idea of Medicare for all, he was standing there by himself. Last time when he introduced it, there were 17 U.S. senators, him and 16 other U.S. senators signing off to that. So what before was an outlier out of the mainstream, Bernie Sanders, has become mainstream, hasn't it?
It has. And, well, we've had the failure of Obamacare.
Mm-hmm.
And when Obamacare was passed, a lot of us looked at it and said, okay, well, it's not going to work because the numbers don't add up. So what they're really after is a single-payer system. And now Obamacare is not working. The numbers aren't adding up. It's expensive. You don't get to your choices and things like that. So this is a natural for some people. It's actually logical for some people, but it's not logical when you look at the cost.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying $32 trillion, and that's if you don't abolish insurance companies. If you abolish any kind of medical insurance and the government is just the payer for everybody, then it's going to be more than that. It's going to be impossible to pay for. And I think, Americans who balance a budget at home and, think about making ends meet at the end of every week or every month, they're going to see this for what it is. So it's probably going to be unpopular and drag them down, but still, sometimes the move left is like a gradual one.
Yeah.
And, as far left as the Democrats go, a lot of times, the Republicans sometimes move to the center then.
They get drug along.
They get drug along.
That's very much
and
the
so
case.
that's another concerning part of all this.
Well, one of the things that you just pointed to is cost. We just talked about the cost, according to Senator Elizabeth Warren, on what it would cost for government daycare. First of all, let me hasten to add to all of our listeners, whatever their estimate of cost, it is a fraction of what it will really cost. And if you don't believe that, let's just go back and look at what was predicted, because I have that in one of my commentaries, for the cost of Medicare and what it really costs. So first of all, any numbers they give us are always on the low side. Number two, I'd like to have somebody total them up. Maybe we should do this and say, okay, you just gave us Medicare for all, and that one comes from a think tank that I think, again, maybe even lowered the estimates a little bit on a couple of issues, but you add all these up and you just say, where does this money come from? We're $20 trillion in debt. As one of the individuals, Mark Stein, used to say, it's not that the government is broke, it's $20 trillion past broke. If somebody were to say, or is Kerby or Penna broke, I mean, we have zero in the bank. That wouldn't, but if somebody said, no, you're past broke because you owe $1 million, for example,
and you don't have anything in the bank.
You don't have anything in the bank. That's kind of where the federal government is. And so somewhere along the line, we need some adults in the room to say, we just can't simply afford it. Even if you think this is a good idea, and I think you and Frank Wright will deal with how bad these ideas really are on Monday, we just simply don't have the money to pay for it, even if you think it's a good idea.
Yeah, this is something not only do we have to deal with Monday, we have to deal with these things every day. And you, ladies and gentlemen, need to educate yourselves. That's why listening to Point of View, taking advantage of the resources on our website is so important, because it will help you to answer the liberal ideas that are out there among people that you know.
I might just mention the other day when we had Nick Pitts, he was sitting here and I was sitting there, but we were talking about capitalism, socialism, and I offered the little booklet on capitalism and socialism. And some people wrote in and wanted to get a copy, and I would love to give it to you to hand to a young person, because as we pointed out, it breaks down to almost one-third, one-third, one-third. About one-third certainly do believe that capitalism is superior to socialism. But the other two-thirds bother me, because two-thirds actually think socialism is better than capitalism, and one-third really don't think there's any difference. And so we have two-thirds that need to be educated, and that's the product of the public education system. Yeah. So we need to counteract that. And that's why you need to listen on Monday. I think you're going to enjoy the conversation Penna's going to have with Dr. Frank Wright. Carmen Pate, that's going to be a great story as well. And then all through the week, we'll be talking about some other issues. We're going to talk about climate change next week. Going to talk about rapid onset gender dysphoria, if you can believe that. That's a thing, apparently, and we'll talk about those. So let me mention one more time, just about out of time, that again, you can find Penna's commentary, all the information from Kelly Shakelford. And if you haven't contacted your two senators, we give you an action item on the website, pointofview.net. And again, all the articles, viewpoint commentaries, I hope you'll sign up for them as well. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for the help behind the scenes. Looking forward to hearing Penna Dexter on Monday. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday.
Question: do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about Medi-Share.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With Medi-Share, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with Medi-Share. And they actually like Medi-Share more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of Medi-Share.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less and they like it more. No wonder Medi-Share is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.